What's up guys, HCZ here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're starting to take a look at each of the Egyptian gods separately. We just got the structure decks with whole new support and now we can finally build a decent amount of decks around them. I know that we still can't build any pure SLIFER obelisk deck and I wish we could, but Konami didn't decide to give us too many cards, but still we're going to use what we get. So I think that in order to be able to use the god cards efficiently, there are a couple cards that you need to be able to use in your deck that some of them are not even from the structure deck. Was an old card that I think makes a lot of sense, so this is why you're going to see the build that you're going to see now. And before we begin the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So the first deck that we're going to see is about SLIFER. Now, SLIFER and Obelisk, they're interchangeable. It's not something that makes specifically SLIFER good in one deck and Obelisk in another deck. They're pretty much serve the same kind of purpose as comes to about being an engine in a deck, and it all comes down to which one you like more and which one you prefer to play. So no matter what you see in this deck, the cards that are specific to SLIFER can be interchanged with the cards with Obelisk. So starting off, we have of course 3 copies of SLIFER. You need to max out the gods now just because of Soul Crossing. Being able to use this card as a disruption with a god means that you need to be able to see them, and fortunately they're searchable, which is one of the good things because there is an old card that will be able to search them, so there's that as well, so you don't really need to just hard draw the cards because that would be completely inconsistent. So I think it's a decent thing that you can do that, and also being able to play your deck around this effect makes it so much more consistent, and which is why I decided to play this deck that you'll see. So as far as SLIFER goes, I think in terms of competitive viability, right now SLIFER is better than Obelisk. It was always the thing that Obelisk was the better card just because it was untargetable, always had a standard attack value that was really big, while SLIFER can be targeted and also might come on the field with 1,000 or 2,000 attack points, which is not that great. But the effect to being able to disrupt your opponent, especially in a link format, is so important because, yes, SLIFER, you can play around his effect, but drops the attack of all monsters are summoned in attack mode by 2,000, and if they hit 0, they blow up. But you could just summon them in defense mode, but you can't do that with links. So if you summon this, maybe against a Dragon Link deck, then your opponent's not going to be able to play unless they summon something big first, they deal with SLIFER, and then they can go into the link monsters, because stuff like Striker, Dragon, LP, and Pisty, and Romulus, they all have low attack points, so they'll blow up instantly the moment they're summoned on the field because they are forced to be summoned in attack mode since they're link monsters. So this is why SLIFER, I think, is just a better card, because it gives you some value when you have it on the field. Well, Obelisk is just a push play. So yeah, to be honest, I think if you want to play a deck that is a god-based deck but also more fun, and if you don't really have any specific value of playing either Obelisk or SLIFER just because you like them all equally, then I think you should pick SLIFER. But of course, if you like Obelisk more, then you can change with Obelisk. So yep, 3 SLIFER. Now the rest of the deck, this is more of a Lair of Darkness deck, but I do play some specific decks in the deck that you don't really see in an original Lair of Darkness deck, just to be able to utilize some cards. So I do play 3 copies of Torghast from the Underworld. The reason this card is here is for 2 reasons. With Lair of Darkness, it's not a bad card. It's not the best, just getting a Lily with her effect negator from the deck, but you can still use her cost effect, and with Lair of Darkness on the field, you can use that as disruption, but her main purpose is the next card, which is a 1 copy of Edgem Sabers. So I was trying to search for stuff that could stack the deck. I mean, of course, aside from Dark Magician, because we already covered Dark Magician deck in the previous profile, where we featured all 3 god cards, but now that we're going to take each of the god cards separately, I decided to mix it up a little bit and make a little bit of a different deck just to be able to go into the same kind of strategy with different cards. So Edgem Sabers gives you the benefit of stacking your cards for true name, while also giving you a free monster on the field to be able to link climb. So this card is not that bad, because the card you stack in your deck, when you use this effect, you're going to get that card back because of true name, because you are going to get that card to your hand and then either search or special summon your god card. So this is why being able to get to this card through your tour guide is really important. But I also play more ways to get access to it, because if I was relying on just tour guide, then that would not be consistent enough in order to be able to go into SLIFER very often. So this is why I think that you need to play some other cards on top of having your tour guides in order to be able to get to that. 1 copy of Skarm, this is another way to get to your tour guide. You just send this with another card I'm going to show you, or just Foolish Burial, which is very, very good when you can get that to get to your tour guide. Or if you already have access to tour guide, the search is Lilith, so it has immediate synergy with the deck while also having synergy with tour guide. 3 copies of Lilith. You need to max out Lilith if you're playing a Lair of Darkness deck. She's by far the best card. In combination with Lair of Darkness, the amount of advantage this card gets while also being a disruption and netting you a card on the field is just so important. This card is really good, and even if you get her with tour guide on the field, if you don't have her effect, you don't really care, because as long as you have traps in the grave in the deck, I mean, in order to be able to activate her effect, you can disrupt your opponent with Lair of Darkness during your turn and during your opponent's turn, so this card is really, really good. 3 copies of Arima. Arima just got a reprint in the structure decks because this card was not very accessible, and think now it is more accessible, so I think this deck is actually a good way in order to start your playing a god card, because you can get access to most of the cards very, very easily. There's not a card in the deck that's very hard to get or very expensive. And Arima searches you your field spell. I think you need to max it out. I also play Terraforming because you need to see Lair of Darkness ASAP. You could play Metaverse too, but I don't really like Metaverse ever since it got limited in this deck just because you can't get access to it with Trap Trick. And if you use Lilith, you just rely on a 33% chance to get it, which is not the greatest. And this card also searches you your Diabolos, which I play one copy of. And Diabolos is a card that you don't really need to play more than one. Before, people thought that this card was just the big boss monster that you need to max out and you need to see, but not really. The deck does not rely on this card in order to do damage. The deck just slowly but surely chips away at your opponent with using effects like Lilith in order to minimize their advantage, well, maximize your own advantage. Diabolos is just an extra card that you can search with your Arima whenever you have something else to tribute or tribute something your opponent has, maybe tribute one of your tokens with Lair of Darkness to get it on the field. And the moment this card hits the grave, it's just going to keep coming back unless it gets the Crow, but even if that happens, you don't care that much. So being able to draw this during the late game, in the mid game, if you already have access to it, means that you're able to draw another brick, which you don't really want, so I think just playing one copy is perfectly fine. Moving on to the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Thunder Force Attack. This card, if you're playing Obelisk, you're going to switch this with 3 copies of Fist of Fate. But this card, again, this is another reason why SLIFER is better now, because aside from looking at the gods just on their own, this card is much better than Fist of Fate, because it's an effect, both effects of Fist of Fate and this is just that your opponent cannot negate them. But this card destroys all face-up monsters your opponent controls, and if you use this during your own main phase, you're going to draw cards equal to the number of monsters you popped, so you can increase SLIFER's attack points. But most of the time, you're going to be using this during your opponent's main phase in order to disrupt their monsters, because if SLIFER can't deal with them, then this card will. So yeah, this card is so good. Aside from Fist of Fate, which is just something like an impermanence and then it blows that monster up, which is okay, but it's not as high impact as a card like this. So I really like Thunder Force Attack. I think it's a really, really good card, and you need to see this because unfortunately this card is not searchable, so you need to hard draw it. Next up, we have 3 copies of Soul Crossing. This is the reason the gods are even more broken than ever now, because you just have so many ways to disrupt your opponent. So on top of being able to use this to tribute 3 monsters your opponent controls to summon a god during their turn, you also have SLIFER's effect to disrupt, and if you also have Thunder Force Attack, you also have a Raigeki on top of that. So I mean, what's your opponent gonna do if they don't Twin Twisters your stuff or Harpy's Feather Duster your stuff before you get to use them? Then there's not much your opponent can do, because even if your opponent like Dark Rulers or Imperm SLIFER and doesn't have the effect, Thunder Force Attack doesn't care because the name is still there, so you're going to be able to use it. So being able to combine this on top of Soul Crossing to tribute monsters is really good, and this card is really good going second and breaking boards. If you can bait your opponent's effects and negate somehow, then drop this to summon SLIFER, and you can just basically sphere mode their entire field without even using sphere mode in your deck. So what Ra had before, now all of the gods have technically. So this is why this card is really, really good. 3 copies of the True Name. This card is basically the way to get to SLIFER. You either search it when you're going first in order to go for Soul Crossing, or you special summon it if you want more link material. Going second, you're most likely going to special summon it and then go for a big push play. Usually you want to be able to do that before you commit to the field too much, because the more you commit to the field, the less attack points SLIFER is going to have. So this is why you need to be able to do that first. And this is the reason Egypt Sabers is such a good card in the deck, because you just stack the top of card of your deck. If you don't have the ability to do that, this card is really bad. I mean, come on, there's no way you're going to guess the top card of your deck. I mean, in some funny scenarios, maybe this can come up and this is going to bring for some really funny moments, some really funny victories if you manage to pull it off, which makes the deck even more fun in my opinion, because you can do stuff like that. But still, most of the time you want to be able to guarantee it, and this is why you play Egypt Sabers. Next up, we have 3 copies of Lair of Darkness. You do play a lot of other cards other than Arima and Lilith that be able to use this effect. I do play a trap card also that you can search with Lilith, of course, or Trap Trick in order to be able to use Lair of Darkness effect, which is what the deck tries to do. I think being able to go for a control-based deck is more the thing about the gods. You can't really use combo-heavy decks. I mean, yes, you could use like a combo-heavy deck and summon huge and special summon them with hand, but what are you really accomplishing? I mean, the only way to be able to keep them on the field for as much time as possible so that you can actually feel like you're playing a god deck and enjoy the deck is to control your opponent's board. So this is why being able to play decks like this is really good. 1 copy of Terraforming to search Lair of Darkness, 1 copy of Foolish Burial. This can either send your Diabolos if you need access to a big monster, or you can send your Skarm to get to your search during the end phase, or Egypt Sabers if you want to use the True Name right away, so it does have multiple purposes. 3 copies of Super Polymerization. Super Poly is not the greatest card of the current format, but that's only because your opponent is not going to have a board that you can Super Poly without any help. But Lair of Darkness gives you that extra help. If you're playing something like a zombie deck or this deck, Super Poly is such an important card, because if your opponent doesn't really know what your deck is doing and they let Lair of Darkness go through, then you can just Super Poly the entire board away and you can just destroy them right away, because come on, this card is absolutely ridiculous, being able to not respond to your opponent and then being able to fuse all of their monsters. monsters means that you can basically fuse away their entire board, and being able to make them all dark monsters gives you more options, because Starving Venom is a card, but there's also another card that helps you get rid of even more monsters, which I'll get you when I get to the extra deck. For the drop cards, I played 2 copies of Fane Griffing. This is another way to go to get access to your Edgem Sabers or your Skarm to go into your tour guide to get to your Edgem Sabers, because if you just rely on hard drawing, maybe Foolish Burial, tour guide, this is not going to be the most consistent engine in order to make sure that your true name resolves. So being able to search this card with Traptrick and Lilith means that you have a much more consistent engine, so this is why I recommend playing this card in the deck. 2 copies of Ballista Squad. This card is, I think it's the most high value card that you can get out of your Lair of Darkness, because you tribute one of monsters your opponent controls, and then you pop a card your opponent controls, so you get a 2 for 1, and being able to get this access with Traptrick and Lilith is also really good because it's a normal trap. So I think if you're trying to search for something that can be very useful with your opponent's monsters when you have your Lair of Darkness, cards like Enemy Controller can work, and like cards like Monster Gate can work, but I think this card, because it's searchable through the strategy of the deck being Lilith, then I think it's the best card you can play. 2 copies of Back to the Front. This card gives you a lot of value in this deck, to be honest, because sometimes when you get into a super grind game, yes, you can argue that being able to bring back Lilith is good enough, but I didn't think that this was the main point. The main point of this card is being able to summon SLIFER during your opponent's turn if it's in the graveyard during the grind game, and then what is your opponent going to do? Because if they play Links, then they're not going to be able to summon them, they're going to blow up instantly, so you basically, it's like special summoning something that doesn't let your opponent special summon pretty much any Link monsters during your opponent's turn. So I think this is a really fun interaction with the deck, and I really enjoy playing this card. And 2 copies of Traptrick, because when you use Lilith's effect, instead of having to play 3 copies of every single trap card in the deck that they might be bricks in certain situations, it's much better to reveal the 2 copies of the trap you want with 1 copy of Traptrick to just guarantee that you're going to get the card you want without having to max out on the traps you play. For the extra deck, we played 2 copies of Starving Venom. You don't really need 3 because there's another card I play that makes sure pretty much the exact same use, but still 2 copies might come up, especially in the super grind game, and if you don't rely on your opponent having specific attributes and going for Lair of Darkness, I mean, you're only going to be able to use the dark monsters, so Starving Venom is probably the best card. But a card that's even more high impact than Starving Venom is Predaplant Trifervortium. So this card makes sure that you get rid of the bigger boards. Starving Venom is more generic because when your opponent has 2 monsters on the field, means that they can go into a Link monster, so when you're trying to disrupt them, it's not like you want to wait for a 3rd monster to pop on the field in order to be able to go into the bigger play, because it might be too late at that point, because when they start letting off and you get rid of the resources, maybe Super Pole is not going to stop them. But when your opponent is going second and they already have an established war, when you are going second, and then you can just bet that your opponent is going to let Relive of Darkness resolve if they don't know what this deck is doing, so you can just Super Poly 3 monsters away, get a monster that is also a disruption that can stop the special summon of an extra deck monster, which is really, really good. I mean, the value you get out of this is absolutely amazing, so you have to play this card in your extra deck. And now the rest 3 of the fusion monsters, these are not rely on Lair of Darkness, but you just need to play them just to make the Super Polys in your deck as much broken as possible, because you're not going to be able to get to Lair of Darkness every single time, so you want to cover as many matchups as possible. So we have 1 copy of Dragon Stapelia, 1 copy of Mad Dragon, and 1 copy of Earth Golem Adignister. I really like Earth Golem in this format because I feel like decks like Adignister and Code Talkers are becoming more relevant, so I think you're going to see them a lot more often. So being able to use this card is also really good because it's the only monster you can potentially summon against a deck like this, because they have like different attributes and stuff, so it's not like you're going to be able to summon a Mad Dragon or Star Venom, so you need to be able to use that card. For the Link monsters, first of all, we have 2 copies of Link Spider. Link Spider is here in order to be able to make use of your tokens that you get with Lair of Darkness, because a lot of monsters require effect monsters like Anaconda, so you cannot go into Anaconda using the tokens, you have to make them into Link Spiders first, so this is why you play 2. 1 copy of Cherubini. When you use your tour guide to go into either your Edgem Sabers or your Skarm, you use Cherubini to send the other one to the grave, so you can get both of them, which one will get you access to the true name guaranteed, and then the other one will get you to a Lilith during the end phase, so you need to play this card. 1 copy of Anaconda. Because of Super Poly, you can play Dragoon if you want, but I tried to not include it in every single deck just because I tried to make the deck as budget as possible, and also a lot of people think that Dragoon is going to get banned, so I don't want to post a profile that might be completely useless afterwards, because if you're playing Dark Magicians and something like Red As Fusion gets banned, you can still summon Dragoon, but in any other deck you can't, so in this deck you won't be able to. So Anaconda is just here to copy Super Poly, and can also make an opponent's monster dark, so you don't really need Lair of Darkness in order to use this, because Anaconda is a dark, so just make 1 monster dark, and then you have that materials for Venom right there. 1 copy of Masquerena in order to go into Unicorn during your opponent's turn, just because you can get a lot of tokens, and sometimes you can get a lot of disruption on the field, because when you use traps, when you use Masquerena, when you use SLIFER, when you use Lilith with Lair, you have so many ways to interrupt your opponent that being able to use those monsters is really good, and you do have Back to the Front, so even if you just can't summon anything else class other than Masquerena, having a back to the front means that you will have that monster you need in order to link climb into Unicorn during your opponent's turn, so there's that too. We play the Nightmares, we play 1 copy of Cerberus, 1 copy of Phoenix, and 1 copy of Unicorn. Link Spider makes it so that these cards can get you the draw effects, so this is why the tokens really help, so this is another thing you could do with a deck. And I do play 1 copy of Boral Sword. You can replace it with Access Code if you have access to it. You can play Appaloosa instead, but I don't think you're ever going to be able to get an Appaloosa during your own turn, because you have so many ways to disrupt your opponent using your own monster, so it's not that optimal linking away stuff like Lilith for an Appaloosa, unless you have like the most insane hand ever, and you can go into Tour Guide and multiple tokens with Link Spiders, then yes, maybe that can come up, but I don't think it will come up enough. So I think going for Boral Sword means that you can OTK even if you can't get access to SLIFER, so this is why I try to include it. So yep, that's the deck, guys. SLIFER, I think, is, at least it's my personal favorite god. I know a lot of people out there either enjoy Obelisk and they enjoy Ra, which is why we are going to make profiles for those two as well. I know Ra didn't get any direct support in the structure decks, but I think if we're going to profile the gods, then we need to include Ra. I mean, why not? So this is why we're trying to make different profiles for each one, because you can technically include any of them in the same exact deck, but I'm trying to show you different strategies that you can pick up for, depending on which god you want to play. It doesn't really matter, you just need to pick up the strategies that you can incorporate them in, so I'm trying to include more different stuff so people can enjoy different strategies, so this is another one. So yep, that's it, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.